Geeks and geekettes, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, it's Wednesday morning. It's time once again for Ask Chuck Dixon, where you get to ask me, a comic book professional, working comic book professional, of world renown, questions about what I do for a living. And what I do for a living is I sit here and make stuff up all day. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. If you have subscribed, thank you. Since I started asking for subscriptions, the viewership of this little show has expanded exponentially, and I appreciate it. So if you want to help the show out, help yourself out by helping to grow this audience, hit that little button down below. It won't cost you a cent. No salesman will call. All right. Keon Kurji. My grandmother once asked me for a movie to watch. I asked her what kind. She said either a James Bond movie or a space movie. So I gave her Moonraker and said, well, here's a James Bond in space. What are your thoughts on Bond movies such as Moonraker? Awesome, retarded, or both at the same time? Moonraker was an obvious attempt by the James Bond movie producers to cash in on Star Wars. It fails by almost every measure. It's not a good Bond movie. It's not a good science fiction movie. It's not a good space movie. It's not even really a good gonzo action movie. It just fails everywhere. It's one of the weaker entries, which is a shame because they spent so damn much money on it. But that said, there's some good stuff in it. Overall, it's gorgeously photographed. And the Amazon River boat chase sequence is one of the better chases in the Bond franchise. It's exciting, suspenseful, and you're not sure how 007 is going to get out of it. So that part I enjoyed. Another scene which is exceptional and really should have been in a better movie. It's one of the more horrific death scenes in a Bond film. Is the death of the bad Bond girl. You know, the girl earlier in the flick who works for the bad guy who falls for Bond and must, of course, meet a horrible fate. This sequence, she's run down by Dobermans. And we don't really see much of anything, but it's horrific. The whole idea is horrific. But what really puts the scene over the top is it's shot like a perfume ad. There was a perfume ad at the time that was very popular. And this scene very much apes that commercial. And by setting this horrific scene against this idyllic pastoral setting with the sun coming down through the forest into a glade and all that stuff, it's really a creepy scene. And like I said, I wish it was in a better movie. Also, Drax is a villain who's more relevant today than ever. Drax's little speech about reducing the population of the planet in order to improve the ecology is almost word for word the same speech that Klaus Schwab gave in Davos recently. So our world elite have caught up with the James Bond villains. And of course, Klaus Schwab is a James Bond villain. If you've ever heard the guy talk and the things he says, the crazy, nutty, maniacal things he says about reducing the Earth's population, I notice he hasn't volunteered. To save what? Certainly not humanity. Anyway, Drax is a terrific villain. Michael Lombard does a great job and has a terrific line. He has one of, after Goldfinger's "No, I Expect You to Die," he has one of the best Bond villain lines in which he tells James Bond that I'm going to put you out of my misery. That's a good one. I like that one. Of course, the weakest part of the film is the quote unquote comedy inserts featuring Jaws and his pigtailed girlfriend. They're really awful and totally ruin any chance this movie might have had being considered a serious espionage thriller. And I recently watched a fan edit. Now, by fan, I mean some professional film editors went in and they excised as many of the corny, cringeworthy gags as they could out of the film. And they played around with the music a little bit. And it improved it. Still not a good film, but certainly taking that stuff out made it more watchable. But there's not a whole lot you can do with this movie to make it that much better. Including, I like Roger Moore. Who doesn't like Roger Moore? Charming guy. But, this isn't one of his better Bond entries. He's got too many creaky single and double entendres, which when he delivers them, they're a little bit skeevy. Pierce Brosnan and Connery could get away with lines like that. Moore, not so much. They come off pervy. Oh gosh. Next question. David Jordan. Was Mark Waid pissed at you? Why David thinks Mark might have been pissed at me is this panel from Justice League, a Justice League story in '98, written by Mark Waid. I don't know who he's referring to as, For those of you listening and not watching, Martian Manhunter is either saying or thinking, and every single person in Wyoming with the last name Dixon has contracted typhoid. Maybe he meant Buzz Dixon. Maybe if I lived in Wyoming, I'd take it personally. It's more possible that Mark was just, in 1998, I don't think he had any reason to be mad at me or have any animosity toward me. My name probably just, he's probably looking at a pile of comp comics and my name was on top. That's it. I'm sticking to that story. General Savage, when it comes to writing characters who are members of the military, work for the FBI, or are police officers, special forces, that kind of thing, what's the most research you've ever done for trying to accurately portray that experience or to make sure it doesn't feel corny? Like, have you ever asked anyone you knew that was in the military or worked for the CIA, etc., what it was like? Did you ever read anything about what those jobs were like at all, or did you mainly try to write those kind of stories however you wanted? Also, what fictional secret agency do you think would be the coolest to work for? Example, SHIELD, SWORD, Argus, etc. As I've said in previous videos, from the time I was a kid all the way to today, if I meet a guy or gal who's been downrange, who's been in the service, especially if they've been in combat, I will pester them with questions. And not stupid, rude questions like, did you ever kill anybody? Nothing like that. Just, where did you serve? What unit were you in? What time period? What was that like? And so I've always been curious about that stuff. And I always think that asking people who've served questions is, in a lot of ways more meaningful than saying thank you for your service. Because thank you for your service is like, happy birthday or get well soon. It's a sentiment, but there's not a lot of sentiment behind it. I always find that, men and women who've served, if I'm curious about it, I ask a lot of questions, they feel good about it because I'm not asking out of morbid curiosity. I'm actually interested, and as a writer, I'm always looking for little details or bits of jargon or phrasing anyway. So it's part of my job, I guess. But I'm just naturally curious about it, and they find that curious. Once they realize I'm not just looking for horror stories, and that I respect them for what they did and appreciate what they did. I think they feel good. They open up and tell me stuff, and so I've always done that kind of thing, and in particular to. The thing that interests me most as a writer is the way they talk about it, the words they use, the phrasing they use. Because otherwise, if I'm writing about cops or soldiers or spies or whatever, what do I have to rely on? What I've seen in TV and movies or read in books. And a lot of times that stuff's crap. This is not true. Sometimes as an icebreaker, I'll ask someone I know has been in combat. I'll say, well, do you really yell incoming when you hear mortar fire or artillery fire? And I know they don't. And I know they never did. But it opens it up, and then they get to say, oh, no, we never yelled that. The most common one I've ever heard is, we're effed. But and of course, they don't bowlerize that. So I think that's the thing. And, I don't want to use jargon that I hear on TV, because generally it's like using hipster language you hear on TV. By the time you hear it on TV, it's passé or made up or no longer in use. I generally try to have my characters like this just talk like normal people do, and when I have to, when you're dealing with like pilots and things like that, there's jargon, there's technical exchanges and things like that. And those are the hardest ones to work out and find out about. Because you want to throw that stuff in for verisimilitude, make the stuff believable. But generally, I just have them talk like normal people, because they're us. Our cops and our soldiers and all the rest are citizens just like us. And, maybe a little darker humor, maybe a little more ball busting, but, they're, I don't treat them like they're a breed apart, in any really significant way. Now, when it comes to spy stuff and things like that, I've never talked to anybody that I'm aware of who worked for the CIA, and I certainly wouldn't pester them with questions. The closest I came was I worked with a guy who was a former Secret Service agent, and he had applied to the CIA, actually had been to Langley and interviewed and everything else, but he was a Secret Service agent. He worked for the Treasury Department, and he told me a lot of inside stuff that was interesting. And I had a neighbor who I know worked for the government, but he would never say what agency. He was very closed-mouthed about his work. He would leave the house at odd times of the night. And after 9/11, I didn't see a lot of it. So I can only assume he worked for one of the agencies in some aspect. But he never, I wasn't about to ask him any questions. When a guy says I work for the government, you say what agency, you know not to ask any more questions. So yeah, it's about, trying to make them sound like normal people, not superheroes or characters. And for me, that's the secret. So what spy agency, fictional spy agency, would I want to work for? I think Control, because there's room for advancement there. I don't think it would be too hard to get ahead. It wouldn't be too hard to get promoted at Control. Their expectations for success seem to be very low. The bar is set low for performance. So I could probably be the director of Control within 6 months. I think anybody could. And I kind of suspect, from what we see about how many times our, intelligence community, I'm using air quotes here, drops the ball. I think Control may be the closest accurate, depiction of our spy community, of our espionage community in fiction. But if I had my absolute druthers, I'd work for Uncle, because they seem to be having a good time. They got cool guns and nice headquarters, and they dress sharp. So they drove cool cars. So I probably want to be a member of Uncle. Oh, Gentle Savage Twin Spin. Okay, you're up, man. And also, are there any movies or stories you consider guilty pleasures, or that you don't think are really that good, but still occasionally find enjoyable anyway? I generally don't believe in guilty pleasures. If you like something, you like something. And you don't have to explain why you like it. Can anybody? I'll give you an example. Senator John McCain. I know he was a POW and all the rest of it, but I really think the bravest thing that John McCain ever did was he admitted he listened to ABBA. Even though ABBA sold millions and millions and millions of records, no one ever admits listening to them. But John McCain, he stood right up and said, "Yeah, I like ABBA." So that was courageous. So yeah, I don't believe in guilty pleasures. If you like, sitting in your underwear, drinking beer, and watching F Troop reruns, God bless you. That's what you like. So with that, the Final Destination movies for me are as close as I get to a guilty pleasure. They're silly, and but they're ingeniously repetitive. And I find that if I watch the first one, which is a good tight little thriller, if I watch the first one, I inevitably will binge the rest over the course of a week, and usually around this time of year, for some reason. And Halloween kind of lends itself the season, and I'll rewatch all of them except four. Four is awful. Even when they veer into self-parody, I enjoy them. And I guess as a writer, I'm looking at the mechanics of it, because they tell the same story. Each movie tells exactly the same story. It's the same setup and same resolution generally. And, they're going to get to the same place at the end. And I kind of like seeing, well, what were the challenges for the writer? What did they do to make this story feel different? And what did they do to build the characters within it and everything else? So yeah, if I had a guilty pleasure, I would say this was the one, the Final Destination series. Psionic Q. I once read a Marvel What If where the Punisher becomes Venom. As a Venom fan, I found the story fun. I don't know if you like or hate Venom, but I'm curious to ask if you would write a miniseries about that storyline. Well, if it's Frank Castle, I would write it, if they could meet my page rate, which they don't seem to be able to do these days. Yeah, I mean, if it's Frank Castle, I'm not a big Venom fan. I don't hate Venom. I don't really have any feelings about Venom at all. Venom is kind of post my area of interest in Spider-Man. After Ditko left, I wasn't particularly interested in the book. So that's how far back my disinterest in Spider-Man as a comic book goes. But, yeah, it'd be cool. It'd be fun. Why not? Certainly be bloody and violent and nasty. And that's where Frank Castle lives, and that's where Venom lives. So I can see that. I might look at this. Is actually an interesting what if. I obviously it appeared recently. This art looks pretty current. Within the last 10 or 15 years anyway. So I might look this one up. It's interesting. Interesting idea. Ofe. I have been reading the 90s Superboy comic run. Was there any inside DC competition between Superboy and your 90s Tim Drake Robin run? Anything else you can expand upon knowledge-wise on the creator's side of Superboy? And have you read them? And if so, opinions? Yeah, at the same time I was writing Robin, Carl Kiesel was writing Superboy. And for a while there was some overlap because we were sharing Tom Grummett as an artist. Tom eventually left to concentrate more on Superboy, which was cool. I understood that. Tom obviously was a great fit for Robin, but I think what he and Carl had going on with Superboy was more special, if that makes any sense at all. I think my Robin was pretty special, but I think what Carl and Tom had going was something really. There was some synergy there. I hate the word synergy, but that seemed to be what was happening. And was there a competition? No, not really. I really liked the Superboy run. I thought it was a great blue sky superhero story. It was a lot of fun. The characters were, appealing. He kept the story moving. It was really interesting. It's a great period on all the Superman titles. From leading up to the death of Superman, to the death of Superman, to the post-death of Superman, all that period where, you got Jurgens and Ordway and Roger Stern and Butch Guice and, guys like that, doing amazing, amazing stuff with Superman. Really expanding the franchise without breaking it. Doing incredible, because they love the franchise. And ultimately, Carl and I would work together with Tom Grummett on, our own Robin Superboy project. It was a 2-issue prestige thing. I don't think they've ever reprinted this. World's Finest 3. And it was fun. We met at the DC offices and we plotted this thing out in about 45 minutes and then worked worked off that plot. I can't remember who started the story. Either Carl or I started the story and then handed it off. And we just handed it off scene by scene until we were done. And it's cool. It's a fun story. And it was a lot of fun to work on. But I've always liked Carl's writing. He's one of the better comic book writers. And if you watch a lot of these videos, I don't often heap praise on other comic book writers. But Carl knows his way around a comic book page. And as an inker as well. Ivan Magila. My impression is that the relation freelancers, DC Warner or DC Comics, is getting worse in general. You yourself related an eventual problem that you had with them. So how do you see this DC Warner freelancers relationship? Are you seeing some degradation too in your relationship with them? You have a lot of material like Bane, Redbird, and hundreds of stories of many characters. Are you somehow worried? I'm not particularly worried because I have participation agreements on all that stuff, so I'm not worried that they're not going to pay me. It's just that if I did have a problem, there's no recourse anymore. There's nowhere to go, and this is largely because though DC Comics is a wholly owned subsidiary of Warner's, and they can do with it what they will. Once upon a time, DC had some agency, and they don't anymore. An example of this is that Warner's made DC Comics move out to Burbank into a Warner's building and then kicked them out. And they kicked them out post-COVID. They just told them, like, get out of here. Go work at home. We're shutting your offices down. And they laid off a bunch of people, and then they laid off some more, and they laid off some more. And it just seemed like they completely sidelined the company, made it irrelevant. And you got to wonder how long it's going to be before they get rid of the publishing wing entirely. You know, they're not going to get rid of the characters. Characters are worth a fortune to them in merchandising alone. But the problem in Hollywood in general is that there's a big money problem in Hollywood. All of the major studios are deeply, deeply in debt. And when I say deeply in debt, I mean to the tune of tens of billions of dollars. They're losing stock value. Everything's costing more. The box office returns in the last few years have been horrible, just nightmarish. You got a few tentpole movies here and there, but you can count them off on one hand. You got Barbie, you got, the Top Gun sequel. There's not a whole, I mean, when a Taylor Swift concert video is #1 for 2 weeks, you got problems. And to do this, all of these companies are, laying people off, shedding stuff. The guy who's trying to save Warner, who I think is doing a good job. I mean, much better than Disney. Disney will never figure out how to get out of the pit they're in. Not with the personnel they currently have. But the guy trying to save Warner's, I think he's carved a lot of he's carved billions off their debt, and he's renegotiated and he sold a bunch of properties off. And I can't imagine that he wouldn't simply shut DC Comics down. It's losing money. It's hemorrhaging money. They just shut it down and then offer the licenses up. I know. I'm not guessing. I know that there are publishers, there are entrepreneurs who could raise millions to publish DC licensed material done independently, not published by DC. So that's not a problem. The money is there. The money's on the table if Warner's wants it. The thing is, it's such a small amount of money compared to the tens of billions of dollars in debt that they are, that they're not going to get around to this. And as I said, DC has no agency. I mean, who's running DC? Who's looking after DC? Really no one. And no one has been for over 20 years. Back in the day when Paul Levitz or Jeanette Kahn were in charge, Warner's owned them. But Paul and Jeanette jealously guarded DC's brand and DC's territory. They guarded their corner, and they would, lock horns with Warner executives. They just wouldn't do everything they were told to do. They would not whore the company out. They're always finding creative ways to exploit the DC properties that didn't take away from the DC properties. And they're also looking out for the continued existence of the company, as well as looking out for the freelancers. They quite honestly looked out for the freelancers. If you had a problem, you didn't call a talent relations person. They didn't have one. You called, first you called Terry Cavanaugh. She was the managing editor. And if she couldn't solve your problem, she very cheerfully transferred your call to Paul or Jeanette. And you could talk to the person at the top of the pyramid. And they'd solve your problem. I never once had a problem that wasn't solved the same day. Now, to contrast with that, about 15 years ago, I had a problem where I did a few jobs for DC, and California was taking tax money out of my paycheck. I have never lived in California, but they were taking taxes, a significant bite out of my paychecks for working for DC. It took me weeks to straighten it out. Talent relations was a joke. I called legal. They were a joke. I couldn't get anybody on the 7th floor to talk to me, no executives. I eventually pestered an executives at Warner's to the point where he was screaming at me on the phone. And within a few days, I got a refund check. And it never happened again. But those are the lengths I had to go to. Whereas back in the day, one phone call to Paul, one phone call to Jeanette, it would have been handled within an hour or so. And it's because they cared. They cared about the freelancers. They cared about the company. If you were doing good work for them, they wanted you to be happy. Now they don't care so much. And in your question about this, you referenced the Chris Wozniak lawsuit and counter lawsuit from DC, as well as Bill Willingham's troubles over Fables. And this is an example. It's just an example of how bad it's gotten. It's rather ugly. And you got to wonder, where is it going? And yeah, I mean, am I worried about my proceeds? Because they still make a considerable amount of money from DC Comics in royalties off of properties I own and reprints and things like that. And could they vanish? Yeah, they could. Because, I mean, if, circa 2009, they simply stopped paying us foreign royalties. DC, Marvel never did. But DC used to pay royalties on foreign sales. And it could add up, particularly if you did as much as I did. And over the years, I mean, I'm never out of print in Germany, in Italy, in France. I mean, my stuff is always in print. Spain. I mean, there's whole libraries of my stuff. And it used to be I would see regular checks from that stuff, and they simply stopped paying it, even though they're contractually obligated. And when you talk to legal, they just say they're going to look into it. Well, they've been looking into it for years with no result. And but so few freelancers will step forth and complain about it that they don't feel a lot of pressure. Because comic book freelancers, for the large part, are a craven lot. They're always worried about their next job. Me, I'm not, because I know I'm not getting the next job. I just want my back pay. So yeah, it sucks. Freelance relationships with DC Comics, horrible. Don't even get me started on Marvel. Marvel, forget it. But Disney, come on, seriously? They'll send a lawyer to your house to kick you in the nuts just for fun. So, Robert Forhell 2746. Dear Chuck, what if DC and Marvel do a special crossover project? I'm already interested. Crossovers, I love crossovers. One villain and one hero switched the company and stranded for a year in the world of the DC Universe and Marvel Universe. Who would you choose? First of all, I got to tell you, Robert Forhell, this is genius. You should be running DC and Marvel. This is a genius idea. I can't believe nobody's ever thought of this one before. And now that you have brought it forth and I'm going to talk about it, they'll probably do it. Of course, they're going to have, the weak-kneed, half-assed talents they have now work on it, so it'll be completely unremarkable. But this, can you imagine back in the day this happening? And you take a top DC hero and a top DC villain, stick them in the Marvel Universe for a year. Same thing with a Marvel hero and villain, stick them in the DC Universe for a year and step back and watch what happens. Crazy time. Now, just for commercial purposes alone, because it's the only thing that makes sense, I would send Spider-Man over to DCU. I'd send Batman over to Marvel, because that just makes sense. Because those are the ones everybody would want to see. And they're their flagship characters, so perfect sense. Villains? We're going to need Kirby-level villains here. I'm going to send Darkseid over to Marvel, and a lot of you are probably going, well, why wouldn't you send the Joker? Joker wouldn't last 5 minutes in the Marvel Universe. I mean, come on. You got to send a powerhouse. You got to send a near god over there to make trouble. And that's what it's all about. How much trouble can the guy make? And yeah, there are Darkseid level villains and above in the Marvel Universe already, but this would be a new one, and he'd be coming from a different direction, and he'd be bringing all of his pals along with him. You know, Darkseid, you get a whole planet that's going to show up. That would be a blast. Doctor Doom versus Superman. Come on, you want to see that. Everybody wants to see that. How awesome would that be? And the coolest thing about these crossovers, I would play it that for like the first 3 months of all the books, no one in either universe knows what the hell's going on. I mean, you know, where did these guys come from? They're just messing everything up. And it would take everybody a while to catch up. But man, that is such an awesome idea. I really, really love that idea. Rising Star Comics. What do you think when people use X-Men as an example of how comics were always woke political? To me personally, I always thought that it was a weak argument, had no basis in actual fact, because in X-Men, up until the aughts, the racism angle wasn't even that core to the X-Men as a whole. It was an action-adventure, superhero, sci-fi, fantasy, romantic soap opera with everything in the kitchen sink that had an outsider theme on top of it. Plus, X-Men was often very un-PC, definitely not woke, as evident when the same people who parrot that line tried to cancel Chris Claremont last year. Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? The thing about wokeism and political correctness and all the rest of it is the goalposts are always moving. I don't know Chris Claremont's politics, but I'll bet you he was pretty much in line with the woke crowd until, you know, whatever it was he said or did made them turn on him. So yeah, I mean, no, I saw. I mean, when you take the X-Men, the original X-Men in particular, who I saw as a pack of whiners, and now you make them victims, like professional victims. Yeah, and I agree with you that the outsider element's cool, but the outsider element is kind of part of every superhero story, isn't it? Anyway, they have a secret identity. They have an alter ego. Of course, they're an outsider. But taking it this far and then saying the comics are always political. I mean, they may have dealt with the issues of the day. I had a podcast with John Bua recently, and he brought up the fact that the X-Men would often have discussions about religious faith because, you know, Kitty Pryde was a Jew, Colossus was an atheist, Kurt was a Catholic, and they would have discussions about these things, and it helped. And it wasn't about, you know, it wasn't trying to tell the reader what to think on those subjects. It was simply the characters exploring these issues, and it made them seem deeper, more relatable, more real, that they had thoughts like this, that these were independently thinking characters instead of just people on paper. And, you know, and the thing is, I mean, I'll hear the argument, well, Superman, it was political. Superman was a big FDR liberal because he would harass abusive, greedy landlords. Well, that's positing the argument that there's someone who likes greedy landlords. How is that political? Who likes greedy landlords? Nobody does. So that's not political. That's just Superman being, you know, vigilante crime fighter, vigilante, you know, standing for truth, justice, and the American way. The American way certainly isn't high rents and throwing orphans into the street. That ain't the American way. So there's nothing really political there. And maybe politics are part of a story, but that doesn't excuse you injecting your agenda, your political agenda, your personal point of view into superhero stories and telling the reader what to think, or shaming the reader, or literally shaming the reader. Telling readers, if you don't agree with my political stance or the political stance that I've put in the mouth of, Wolverine or Batman, then I don't want you reading my comics. It's divisive. Comics were never meant to be divisive. They have universal themes. And, there are characters you agree with, characters you don't. Daredevil's always been the bleeding heart liberal. Frank Castle has always been the direct opposite. You can argue about Batman's politics, or Ben Grimm's politics. But in the end, it's about escapist fiction. And which kind of leads us to the next thing I want to talk about. There's always talk about Comicsgate, and I don't talk about it a lot here because Comicsgate is many things to many people. To me, it's a pejorative created by people who didn't like certain creators, felt they had betrayed the industry by jumping ship. In most cases, these creators didn't jump ship. They were pushed. They were blacklisted. And then in other cases, they were just people who were dissatisfied with what they saw going on and decided to jump into the game, create their own comics, create comics that they would like. So you got guys like, Richard Meyer, your boy Zach. He creates Splatto comics, and he builds an audience first by making a series of very, very popular videos criticizing the current state of comics. And he puts his money literally where his mouth is and creates his own comics, and is successful at it. He finds a ready audience. And of course, that audience comes from people who've been turned off by what's been going on in comics recently. They don't want to read political diatribes. They don't want to read ideological screeds. They just want to read about, people beating each other up and going into space and fighting monsters and things like that. Then you got Compass Comics, Graham Nolan, seasoned comic pro, builds this company. He and his wife worked very hard to build this company, and he's had tremendous success finding an audience. Rippaverse, or July again, like your boy Zach, had an audience for his videos and decided to jump into the comic game and create comics that he felt that audience would enjoy. And Ethan Van Sciver, he left DC, still hot as a pistol. He was blacklisted, fired from DC for tweets they didn't like. I think that was the case. And he built an audience. He had a ready fan base for his comics, but he built it even larger by becoming a YouTube sensation, by becoming a YouTube personality. And these guys are all basically one-man show. They're not regular publishers. They go project to project, crowdfunding. And that's how most of Comicsgate operates. It operates through crowdfunding. The hard work of marketing and building and fulfilling and delivering. The only exception in the Comicsgate game that I can think of is Araven, which is an actual company. It's a subsidiary of Castalia House. I think that's how that works. And they, I don't really get into the business end of these things, but Araven is part of an actual publishing venture that has jumped into the comics game because they saw what these other guys saw and gals. There was a ready audience for comics that was underserved. And you can jump in and exploit that because that's what publishers do because it's a business. So, to one degree or another, you've seen some incredibly successful efforts, successful enough that these creators can make a living doing the work they do, doing the work they want to do. They don't need permission. There's no gatekeepers. And they're just out there making comics that they like. And they found out that the comics they like are liked by other people. So that they're making the money. And there's nothing really political about any of this. with the exception of some of the stuff from Archaven. Some of the stuff, I mean, I've written for Arctoons, has a political bent to it, but that's kind of the deal there. And I mean, for example, I do a series called Alt Hero Q, in which the hero is directed by the mysterious QAnon on his missions. He's kind of like James Bond with QAnon as his spy agency or mentor or guardian or whatever the hell you want to call it. And yeah, it's a right-wing fantasy, but The Handmaid's Tale's a left-wing fantasy. Conservatives can dream too. But that's the only thing overtly political, and really it's not overtly political because I'm not pushing my my views, except that it's anti-globalist. But as I mentioned earlier, James Bond for a long time was an anti-globalist, so no difference. And the Q thing kind of makes it controversial, so more people take a look at it. But that's the exception that proves the rule. For the most part, the rest of these guys and gals are just doing what they want to do. And I think it's coincidental that so many of them, your boy Zach and Ethan and Eric and Graham, are politically conservative. In some cases, they were blacklisted. In other cases, they were ready. They could see from their worldview, from their point of view, the situation. They could read the room and realize, hey, comics don't need to die. They can be saved, and we can reach out to that audience of people who've turned away from comics. Vast audience, majority of comic readers have left mainstream comics. They just don't buy them anymore, and that's a shame. But these guys jump in and they're working hard, and it is hard. This is hard work, crowdfunding. Once upon a time, you could just write and draw, and that's all you did. Somebody else did the marketing and the fulfilling and all the rest of it. But these guys have had to learn all of this stuff about merchandising and printing and shipping and blah, 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 blah. It makes me tired just to think about it. I've done work for all these guys, and happily so. But they're the ones really sweating it. They're the ones taking the risk, doing the work. And then of course you have the Dark Lord, whose motivations remain a mystery. But I dig working with them, and I dig working with all these guys. And I've been given an extraordinary amount of creative freedom by each of these people. I mean, it's their money, and they're trusting me with it. And but I think I've done okay by all of them. I mean, everything I've worked on for Splato and Compass, I've yet to. Well, I did a job for Ethan recently, which I hope helps him sell books. And Graham and the Rippaverse and all the rest of it. I mean, I've added value. Every campaign that I've done with these guys has been successful. Beyond my wildest dreams anyway, and certainly more successful than I could ever have done on my own, because these guys figured it out. They've broken the code. They know how to do the crowdfund. Now, they go after crowdfunding, the haters, the naysayers, from the left and the right. I was recently called a communist because I worked with Eric July. I wasn't aware Eric was a communist. I really don't know anything about Eric's politics, other than the fact that he keeps his promises and pays on time. So they go after crowdfunding, and it's getting bitter. It's getting more and more bitter. And I think the reason is because crowdfunding is starting to take a bite out of the sales of the mainstream companies. They're starting to get a market share, not officially, of course, because they're not on the Diamond 100 or they're not on, bestseller lists and things like that, because these are basically all privately funded, privately distributed publications for the most part. But the bite is being felt, and you can see it in the numbers. These crowdfunding guys, just working out of a warehouse or working out of their garage or their basement, are starting to get numbers that are competitive and in some cases exceeding the circulation numbers of the big two. Eric July in particular, all of his books are trades. They're all 100 pages or more. He doesn't do pamphlets. He's putting up numbers that are as high or higher than most of Marvel and DC's monthly output. And this is for trades, not for a $7 20-page pamphlet. This is for a 100 and 120 page book. Those are incredible numbers. And obviously, he's obviously beating the numbers on their trades. So this is a big chunk out of their market share. But the American comic companies have bigger problems than the crowdfunding guys, than the Comicsgate people, and that would be Manga. And I don't know. There's nothing they can do about it. It's too late. Manga has taken over. Most comic book readers in the United States today are reading Japanese comics. They're not reading American comics. And the American comics maybe 20 years ago could have done something about that, but they didn't bother. They just kept going back to the same well, reboots and another crisis and another secret war, and just doubling down on the superheroes all the time. And that was obviously not what the audience wanted. And even in American comics, the big two don't rate. If you look at the graphic novel sales in the United States, very rarely do you see a DC or Marvel publication there. They're usually smaller independent publishers or book publishers who have a graphic novel wing, and they're more universal, more young adult, or adult, even adult books. And the thing is, what are we supposed to do as comic book creators? The big companies didn't want us. They won't hire us. We're still able to do this stuff. A lot of us are still at the peak of our creative abilities. Are we supposed to just go away? Are we supposed to just let American comics die? We're supposed to let DC and Marvel kill them? No, we're not going to do that. We're comic book lifers. Everybody I've talked about is, maybe they've only become one recently, they are now a comic book lifer. They are in the game. They are liking this medium, loving this medium, and they want to explore it further and exploit it. And by exploit, I mean in a good way. And, find audiences, make stuff that readers want to read. I enjoy creating this stuff because I'm creating these characters and these worlds and everything else because I dig it. When someone else likes it, when they respond to it favorably, that's icing on the cake. I mean, that's great, that I'm in a position where I can do this stuff. And I'm not going to give it up just because someone says I can't, or someone says I voted for the wrong person, or, I don't have a right. I don't have a right. Come on, I've earned my right. I paid my dues. I've been in comics for a long time, and I have no plans on departing from comics anytime soon. So whatever Comicsgate means to you, I don't know. What it means to me is they just put a name on the system of discrimination practiced by Marvel and DC. Marvel and DC created Comicsgate, whether they meant to or not. Hey, if you have a complaint, question, suggestion, other great ideas for really cool crossovers, let me know at brunobookstore@gmail.com, brunobookstore@gmail.com. It is the most reliable way of reaching me. And while I still have you, speaking to your boy Zach, First Kill, the graphic novel, Rambo's first tour of duty in Vietnam, is still in demand. It won't be in demand long. We're going to be fulfilling this one soon. So if you want to hop on that big bird and be a part of First Kill, I would appreciate it. And so would Sly, and so would Richard. So that's it for me this week. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing. Thanks for however you reacted to my words of wisdom. And I'll see all of you down the road.